Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to our esteemed audience that is joining us from all around the globe. Thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to have you for what I'm positive is going to be a very insightful, exciting panel discussion on the impact of L&D in organizations and employee experience. I'd like to have our panelists join so that we can welcome them as well. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. It's very nice to see you all. So warm welcome to our panel of distinguished experts in all things people. Hello, Carol. Hello, Kimberly, Krista, and Catalina. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I know some of you, we've done panels before together, so we know each other, and others I have not. So nice to meet the new people. I wanted to start by having each of you share a brief introduction, including where you're joining us from, and a snapshot of your impressive backgrounds. Great. Can we start? I'll start. Lisa Sanders, I'm moderating today. Full disclosure, I woke up in the middle of the night with a horrible cold. I'm going to try and keep my coughing, etc., to a minimum, but I may have to just quick jump off here and there. So your patience is appreciated. Catalina, why don't we start with you, and then Krista, you can take it from there, and Kimberly, and then Carol.
Thank you, Lisa. So sorry about your cold. Keep tight. Hello from London. It's sunny for a change. I'm Catalina. I've been over 25 years in corporate HR for all my sins, done a lot of generalist roles, CHRO, CLO roles for mainly listed tech companies and some scale-ups. I'm now enjoying a portfolio career, well, a buzzword, first one of the day, wearing a couple of hats. So one hat is I'm a consultant specializing in learning technology and learning strategies for large companies. I'm a VP at Emerge Education. It's a European fund supporting early stage tech ventures. And lastly, I'm super passionate about investing and supporting growth of startups co-founded by women, especially those focused on the future of work.
Great. Thank you, Catalina. Krista.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Krista Vaught. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee in the U.S., and I design and facilitate a variety of learning experiences, most recently for employees within a higher education institution. And so my team creates and hosts workshops, peer-to-peer experiences, mentoring programs, and so on. I'm also an ICF certified coach, and so really enjoy fostering meaningful growth and development and helping people figure out what they want to do with their lives and how to be fulfilled. Also recently completed the Hacking HR People Experiment. Definitely highly recommend that.
Great. Thank you, Krista. Kimberly.
Hi, yes, I'm here from the Sacramento area in California. I have been in HR. I started out in Silicon Valley, I'll call it over 20 years ago, a little bit more than that, and have been leading and directing the HR talent management specifically function in focusing on learning and development, performance management, and everything else. I recently left corporate HR to start my own consulting firm.
Great. Carol.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Cooley, and I'm an HR executive based out of Denver, Colorado, here in the United States. My background is probably evenly split between a lot in the financial services sector, as well as healthcare for typically medium-sized to larger organizations, some Fortune 500 companies as well. I really get brought into organizations to help them focus on a couple of things. What are the dynamics of growth and change within an organization, as well as how do we then upskill and upscale our HR practices to transform from more of the administrative side to a much more strategic business partner and COE type of model within organizations. Glad to be with you today and glad to be a part of this esteemed panel.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing. I didn't share a little bit about myself. I've been doing people, places, talent, culture for over 20 years. Super excited to be talking with you guys about this about how organizations can implement L&D programs, and then the impact of that on employee experience and the employee's journey with the company. I think I'd like to start at the beginning of any program implementation that we all know is where you start, right? In any organization. Can you share with us where you are in your organizations with L&D programs? And then depending on what stage you're at, share with us strategies that you've used in your career to convince stakeholders of, the organization, the importance of an L&D program in organizations. I know, having done this many times myself, getting executive buy-in is hard. It's not easy, right? It's a tough job for us, but as a serial startup people leader, when you embark on this, the buy-in at multiple levels was probably the biggest challenge. I'm curious, all of yours experience. Do you want to start, Catalina? We'll just keep our momentum going around.
Sure, let's go in this circle. No, great question. Where do you start, right? 25 years or so ago, when I started my career in GE, I remember, you wouldn't be touched with a barge if you're in L&D, right? It wasn't like the most sexy, let's say, career in HR, because what L&D was doing was delivering, responding to a brief, delivering, facilitating, maybe doing some instructional design. Gosh, how things have changed, right? If we look fast forward, is one of the most strategic areas of HR, because we are those who are identifying skill gaps, building capabilities, really, delivering organizational value. But I think, where do you start, right? And who do you satisfy first? The learners, the employees that want to learn and grow their careers and realize their potential. The organization, the C-suite, who drives growth, drives their kind of strategic agenda. And obviously, I think the sweet spot is meeting both, right? So what I call, you have to do a bit of digging in terms of becoming more of a curious performance consultant and spotting those areas of the biggest needs of the organization, from a stakeholder perspective, but also understanding the needs and wants of your employees. And then start with programs and solutions, because I think often, and we talk about employee experience and passionate about design thinking, we often fall in love with a solution instead of in love with a problem. And we love creating great, engaging learning experiences and programs and curating pathways and all of that. But we have to kind of step back and think, what is it for? What sort of KPIs, what sort of impact do we have? Are we filling an organization capability gap? Are we engaging employees, right, or both? So that's kind of where I normally start. Obviously, I work now as a consultant with companies, kind of with asking themselves the same questions. How do you start, and how you create things that have an impact?
Great, thank you, Krista. We'll have you go next.
Yeah, I just want to pull out what Catalina just said, that question of what is it for? I think that is so important. And a lot of times we don't dig into that enough, maybe. And so I want to share just a few key points in this. One is finding ways to align learning and development programs with the organization's larger strategic goals. Not a surprise to any of us, but it can be hard to do in practice. And so I think starting with that thorough analysis of what the organization's objectives are, what the top priorities are right now, capabilities, what future skills are needed, and then designing programs that actually address those, while at the same time also talking to employees and figuring out what they need, what they want, what they will actually show up for, what they will actually engage in, because we don't want to be designing learning experiences where employees just aren't interested and not willing to show up. The second piece I want to emphasize is trying to get, we're talking about buy-in, when possible, getting leaders and stakeholders involved early on in the process, and also potentially, when possible, in the design and delivery of the programs. So for example, if we're creating a leadership development program and some of the highest level leaders are able to actually engage in those sessions, to show up and help present those sessions, that can have a very different impact on the employee experience than if we as HR are just facilitating those programs. So showing that buy-in literally with the leaders in the room can be really, really valuable for a lot of reasons.
True. Kimberly.
Yeah, so I would agree with both. I think that I like to call it putting, looking in the mirror. trying to have when you're looking at like whether it's employee engagement, turnover, or adjusting at business goals, and making sure that we have the right tools in place to address those. So if you're looking at the long-term strategy, 18 months, I've been working in tech, so it's usually, as much as we want to say 3 to 5 years, it's usually around 18 months or so. What are we trying to accomplish, and do we have the skills currently to address that? And then you start looking at things more like succession planning, all of those gaps, those skills gaps, and helping leaders see that and the value there. And you're right, Chris. If you don't, if you're not providing content that your employees want to attend, then you're not going to have that. So you need to balance both of those. But employees are looking for that is aligned with the business strategy.
Absolutely. How much do you think, Kimberly, I have a question, the organizational maturity of, where they're at today plays into really any program, but I would say in particular learning and development, because to your point, if you don't have career laddering, you don't have core competencies, you don't have other things in place, right? Jumping right into an L&D program might not be such a good idea, right? It's a lot.
Right.
Oh, okay, now we have an L&D, but we don't have any of these things, right? What do you think about that?
Well, I would agree that an L&D program is more aligned with a slightly more mature organization, but I still think that you're going to have leadership maturity and training that you need to complete. And I think that there is a place, whether it is a full-fledged department, that is running all the time with boot camps and everything else, or if it's a smaller one that's working on the onboarding experience and making sure that those pieces are in place. And then there's some additional, so you can grow that out as the company does mature.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Carol.
I agree with a lot of the points that the panel has made so far. One strategy that I would add is really thinking and highlighting for the organization just the fast pace of change. Conditions are changing so fast in the global economy, global marketplace, that I think that's one thing that I rely on to help kind of set the stage and set the tone for ongoing learning and development within an organization. If you don't upskill, reskill your workforce, they're going to leave and they're going to find other opportunities, or they may not join you in the first place because you don't have those opportunities. I was reading an article this week and some research from Gallup where they were touting a statistic that 22% of workers are worried that their jobs will be obsolete due to technology soon. So if you think about that as kind of the framework or the foundation by which we can start to influence the organization, that's a really great platform to begin to do that. Then I also layer on kind of what are some of those other statistics? What are the other pieces of research that we can leverage into that equation to help leaders understand, that kind of philosophy around, if we don't do something, we're going to fall behind as an organization. How do you tie the learning to the business outcomes, and creating that holistic picture, painting those dots, connecting those dots together, I think really starts to frame the influence that you can have over your leadership on why it's so important to continue to develop and invest in your people in your organization.
Great. Thank you, Carol. I think that, being a serial startup person, typically there's, very few people in the room early on, and L&D has always been something that is important for me to put in place as soon as possible. And so typically early on, when there's, so few people in the room, I do a stipend, right? Everyone has a stipend for X dollars a year, and you can spend it on these things, right? And here's the form that you put in. Don't come to me that you want to learn guitar, because chances are that's not going to go through. That's not one of our goals. But it's, and then I make it usually about 10% of their goals, their PLPs that they put for themselves. 10% of that is on them to research and find L&D programs, right? Because we don't, when you have a startup, you don't have the funds, to have a full team, right, doing that, right? It's just not, it's not part of it, right? Over time it can, and I think I'm going to touch on what you said, Carol. I think flexibility in anything now is so important. I talk about it a lot with the CEOs that I coach and executives, that anything you put in place has to be flexible, right? There's so many unknowns, right? Where we are today may be different from next week. We move fast, we pivot quickly, right? And you need to be able to adapt. And I think the comms around that is super important as well, right? Tell your employees, this is what we're doing now. It may change next week. It might not be a silver bullet, but we are. We're going to roll this out, and we'll keep you posted. But the flexibility is super important, right? It's as companies mature, you need to change, right? Things need to change. Okay, so I think I want to get your thoughts on maybe some your, I guess, key ways that any type of continuous learning culture, it's growth opportunities. What have you seen, and how it has enhanced the overall employee experience?
Maybe I could start and now talking about buzzwords, right? Learning culture is one of the biggest buzzwords that I've been hearing for the last 10 years. And what is it, right? Is that kind of creating that environment for people to feel safe to learn and experience new things, even if it's kind of scary, because in the beginning, us adults don't really easily get out of the comfort zone, right? I remember back in Vodafone, we used to, we retrain hundreds of call center operators to become bot trainers, because they had the scripts with customers in their heads, right? But in the beginning, it was very scary and daunting. It's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to make me redundant? Is it, what stakes are very high? So that's, I think that's one thing that we need to think about when we are setting ourselves this goal, to create a learning culture. Think about the parameters and think about the psychological safety you give people, the time you give people. A lot of us, and we know from the LinkedIn Learning Report and from everyone that you ask, I wish I had more time to learn, but I haven't, right? And that's a perception. It's there. It's because we're not doing a good job communicating that, look, it's okay to make time in your busy diary a week to learn. We're supporting you, right? Your manager will be understanding. It won't make you cancel a course you're going to last minute, right? So all of these kind of artifacts and small things create a culture. It's not just about the budgets. Budgets are nice, right? As you said, startups kind of give you agency, give you some money and say, off you go. There's such a variety of this, but we know from statistics, and I think Learning Report is one. I think even the World Economic Forum is saying that there's a huge direct correlation between retention, career development, and the culture of learning, right? So setting these parameters and giving people the space and communicate, to your point, Lisa, right? Tell people, look, we're going through a big change, technological culture, whatever. There's a lot of stuff we don't know, but we love to get you be ready. Imagine if in HR and L&D would have prepared people for the Gen AI impact, right? No, we're always on a sort of back foot, right? And we're always sort of, explaining people, oh yeah, it's good to get data literate right now. Well, you should have actually done it already years ago, because we have a huge data literacy issue in companies. Forget about AI, right? We haven't even scratched the surface of the AI skill gap. So doing more comms, being more open about this, setting this kind of psychological safety for people, not just to learn, but also to fail fast, right? And to apply the new skills and experiment and not be great at that. And it's fine, right? For maybe the first couple of months or a year. That's, I think that's for me what a learning culture is.
Yeah, I'm gonna, touch on that it's, a learning culture also needs to be that it's okay to fail, right? That's okay, right? That we're here to support you. We're here to make sure you're successful. But, if you fail, that's okay, right? We're going to get back up and get back on track, right? But I think they go hand in hand. Who wants to go next? Jump in.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I really like some of the things that Catalina was saying. One thing that I think about is that we've touched on a little bit is kind of meeting the organization where it is. So a learning culture could be very different things depending upon the organizational context and maturity, right? So if I think about a couple of organizations that I've been in, one organization was an extreme, I'll call them consumer of learning. For that organization, it was all about, going to events and participating in classes, and they were just hungry for more and more content. Now, whether or not that was all absorbed and put into practice from a skills perspective, that remains to be seen, right? And then I had another organization that I was a part of that said, when we rolled out, for example, succession planning, they were like, well, we did this last year. Why are we doing it again? But then when we rolled out LinkedIn Learning for the organization, there was just this tremendous appetite for people to be able to participate in learning events. So when I think about learning culture, I think about how does it show up in the organization, and then what are the things that I can do as a people executive to help reinforce that. One, as we've talked about, is making it okay for people to experiment with different types of learning. And helping set that foundation of it's okay to try and try something different if that doesn't work out. Even on the learning side, let's try something and get feedback from our constituents and continue to iterate around that, even as a learning function. Another thing that I've done to really reinforce that is build that into policies, build it into other programs, and think about things like performance management. Lisa, I think you mentioned it early where you were talking about building that into people's goals and personal development plans. And I've been a big proponent in a number of my organizations of creating a goal specifically focused on development, on self-initiated activities, building a development plan with the manager, and then giving managers and employees tools to be able to do those things and put that into practice.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Excellent points. Who wants to jump in next?
I can.
Okay.
So there's been a couple of different initiatives that I have implemented. One, what's really important is you have the support from the executive team all the way through, and reinforcing that, providing a certain amount of hours, for learning each month or each quarter or however it's, divvied up. One thing that we had put into place when we were really focusing on kind of who owns career development. We were hearing from employees as they were, unfortunately exiting, was that they weren't getting a lot of career development from their manager. And, so we kind of set the expectation that employees own their career development. And we had a training program that we had managers go through. What their role is supporting, giving the exposure and giving some experience so people can apply what they're learning. But employees really need to kind of work and understand what their goals are and where they want to go. So they're in the driver's seat. Managers are the support. And yes, sometimes that means that, if you have a good mobility program, that might mean that you have employees who are leaving, but they're at least staying within the company. They might be leaving your team, but it's good. It's good for retention. It's good for employee morale and engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. Krista, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll touch on something that hasn't, I don't think it's been mentioned yet, but one thing that I've seen is how learning and growth opportunities can enhance an employee's sense of purpose within the organization. And so actually the LinkedIn Workplace Learning Report touched on this recently too. So they found that 8 out of 10 employees said that learning added a sense of purpose to their work, and 7 out of 10 said learning improves their sense of connection to the organization. And so I think those two pieces, the sense of purpose and sense of connection, are so important right now because so many employees are rethinking, what does it mean to be fulfilled at work? Am I fulfilled at work? So it's going beyond just job satisfaction, retention, sort of all of the HR priorities, and going a little deeper into what do employees actually want from work at this point in time, and how can we help create that for them? One other piece that I wanted to mention is just the value of peer-to-peer learning experiences. I think a lot of times when we're thinking of learning and development, it is that very like one person focused, whether it's a LinkedIn Learning course or some sort of self-paced module. But there is a lot of value in those social learning opportunities, and that adds a lot of chances for collaboration. So for people across the organization to meet each other, to interact in a different way. I've hosted so many different workshops and learning experiences where people form connections within those handful of sessions, and then they have new collaborators across the organization that they didn't have before. So reinforcing, creating some new sparks of connection can be really valuable for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on something that I want to, ask everyone their thought on. How important do you think that leadership, right, executive team, whatever, C-suite, that they have a learning mindset and that they are continuously learning potentially plays? What role does that play in the success of any program that you run, that you roll out? I have my opinion, but I want to hear all of yours. Carol, you want to jump in?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Great. Or something, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. You're kind of leading the audience here from my perspective. But, I think Krista mentioned it earlier about potentially having leaders jump in and help facilitate. And I think that's a growth experience potentially for them as well. Even simply kicking off a session or talking about their experiences, as they've evolved through their career. I think it's incredibly important to, have that kind of demonstrated throughout the organization. I think there's this, really concept of, some of the behaviors that the leadership team exhibits are really going to exude down through the rest of the organization. And, I think there's, on the one hand, you can get leaders who say they support it, but when people actually see them being a part of those learning experiences or sharing their learning journey, I think that makes it just so much more powerful.
It shows that vulnerability
Yes.
and builds trust, right? Like, okay, you've been there too, right? Like, we don't know it all, right? And nor should we. And being able to be humble enough and talk about that, right?
Well,
is
otherwise you run the risk of do as I say, not as I do, right? And
Exactly.
having that echo through the
100%.
organization.
Yeah, and that is a sentence that I use a lot when I'm coaching my CEOs is, okay, but are you doing it, right? That are you eating the dog food, right? And
Right.
most of the time the answer is no, right? Like, well, no, but do I need to? Well, yes, you do, right? It's really important because if they're not seeing, if you're not modeling it, then, they don't have as much buy-in, right? There's that trust, right? That you've got them, right? And to your point, Krista, is the feeling purpose, right? Trust and vulnerability play a lot into that feeling like you have purpose, right? Who did I miss? Catalina.
Yeah, if we just think back of when Satya Nadella took over Microsoft and look what he's done to let's say what we call right now culture of learning, growth mindset. I mean, some people read Carol Dweck's book, but really not until he started to preach about don't be know-it-alls, right? Be learn-it-alls. And what a great ripple effect that had in the company, shaping what Microsoft is doing now, the biggest market cap company in the world. And it's just unbelievable. Imagine if all of us would have leaders like him, right? Would go up there and say, look, I don't know it all. I'll spend a lot of time doing self-reflection, spend a lot of upskilling myself. So yeah, leading by example, we know that they can either break or make a positive culture and a culture of learning. And yeah, showing up, right, for everyone, but also showing up in terms of giving people a space and the time to learn, even when you are, end of quarter close, right? All hands on deck, pressure to deliver numbers, still prioritizing the time to upskill everyone and the budgets. So yeah, there's a huge role to be played there by the leadership team.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the questions from the audience kind of lead to my next point that I want to get everyone's. We've talked a little bit about making sure that expectations, both on the employee side and the organizational side, are mission and goals. How do you feel like organizations can align, employee development programs that meet an employee's expectations or what they're looking for, right? But also the organization's mission and goals, right? Personally, I think it needs to be a little more skewed on the employee expectations, right? Because if we're constantly, revenue, you don't tie to that, right? Nobody ties to that, right? We all know we play a part in it, but you tell me that, my goal is revenue, you kind of lost me a little bit, right? So how do you think organizations can align that? And it's delicate. It's a little bit of a tightrope walk. Anyone jump in? Anyone? Carol, you want to take this one? Start? Okay.
Of course. Yeah. It's a really thoughtful question. And as you said, Lisa, it's a delicate balance, right? You need to think about, what's important to the employees, but at the same time, you need to balance what's good for the organization. So, I think it's, like you said, Lisa, revenue's not exciting. Nobody's going to, jump out of bed and say, or very few people, there's got to be somebody. But your average employee is really wanting to tie to what Krista said about a sense of purpose. What's the organization's mission? How am I feeling in the organization? Am I fulfilled? Do I have an opportunity to continue to grow and be a part of something bigger than myself? And do I know where my place in the organization is? So I think organizations really need to where I've seen it be really effective is when organizations take the time to understand how it all fits together. What are the ties? And I've been lucky and blessed enough to be in organizations that really wanted to understand that connection to revenue and to ROI. And in that organization, we did a lot of research with our employee population on what was most important to them, and built career pathing and leadership development and learning and development rotational programs as an outcome of that listening strategy. And not all organizations are there. I talked about it earlier, where there's different levels of maturity. But I think helping leaders understand that you're going to get the most engagement, you're going to get a better employee experience for your people if they have some skin in the game as well. And oftentimes that skin in the game is not only how they can help themselves today, but how they can contribute to the organization as it continues to evolve in the future. And that, I think, is a really simple connection that you can start to influence your leaders with about why it's important to listen to employees and to invest in them at that, individual level.
Thank you. Krista, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, but I'm not sure how much I can add after that. I think the listening is so important because we can do all of these surveys, we can gather feedback, but it's really creating those feedback loops so that you essentially have like ongoing pulse surveys, because so many employees are reaching out to you and sharing what they think and what they need. But definitely agree on it is a delicate balance. And so getting that input from employees. I know we talked about buy-in from leaders, but we also need buy-in from employees for any learning initiative to really work.
That your point of continuous feedback loops are really important.
I just wanted to add, I think that, a lot of training programs, we put the training out there. We, presentations or whatever it is, we put the training out, whether it's in-house or bring somebody in or offer, online, on-demand kind of thing. I think it's really important to back it up with the opportunity to utilize that and put into place, get the experience behind it. So, you can watch a video on making pancakes, but that doesn't mean you can go and make them on your own without doing it, right? I haven't become a chef because I watched a video. And I think that that's one area where employees start feeling, and leaders, honestly, feeling like, where is the return on the investment? This person took a great Excel course, but what did they do with it? And if you go back and ask them in 6 months, how have you applied this? If they're not able to apply it, it's really kind of a loss, opportunities. So I think that it's really important as you're building out these programs with leaders and with the employees, is to make sure you have the opportunity and the managers are aware to give their folks the opportunity to use it and get the exposure where they needed. So I think it's really important. It's a full circle piece.
Absolutely. Catalina, you want to?
Yeah, just reflecting on a lot of the great things that have been said already. I think what we haven't touched on today is skills. For me, there is something about skills that's kind of the answer to all our prayers in terms of demystifying and finding out that sweet spot, right, between, you know, what's important to me as an individual and what's important to the company. And I also, you know, I reflect on all of us recruited people. We ask them all the great questions. We know so much about their aspirations, their skills. And when they choose us eventually, they do that because their values meet ours. You know, they think they can realize their skills and potential. And then we forget, because then Lisa and Kim and Catalina become the job, and we sort of forget about all the great skills and aspirations they have. And then we invest in technology platforms to find out what those skills are that we knew from the beginning. And then we match them and all of that conundrum, right? So I think at some point, and again, enabled by technology, I hope we'll be in a point where all of this is seamless and real time. And hopefully now with obviously what's happening in Gen AI and everything that will be possible, continuous conversations between what's important for CEO to grow the business, what's important for me to grow my career and stay, and then continuously listening, right? And then getting this kind of bespoke solutions that are not very complicated or costly. Yeah, like, I don't know, coupling me up with a buddy who maybe knows more about the skill area than me, or, you know, mentorship, or getting me to a project that maybe where I can enhance those skills. I hope that's kind of where we're going to. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-fledged multi-million-dollar SaaS platform that will solve that. So we'll see. That's but I do feel that skills are kind of the thing here, if we get them right.
Yes, yeah, that leads right into what my next topic was that I wanted to talk about, is what role do you think tech plays in the L&D programs that you put in, and the experience, right? It's a delicate balance there with tech. You know, we have so many, leaders are very typically, bright, shiny objects are really attractive, right? Like, this is going to solve everything, right? And then you end up having 10 of those systems in place. None of them play well together. And now you have tool sprawl, right? And employees immediately disengage because it's too much. It's like, I have no idea where to go for what. So I'm out, right? So how do you all feel about where the role of tech fits into putting in a program and the overall experience for employees? Carol, you want to jump in?
Of course.
Okay.
Tech is, I say this regardless if I'm, connecting to a webinar or doing a Zoom meeting. Tech is great when it works right, and when it helps make things easier. And when it makes it more complicated and more complex, people often have a tendency to disengage with that. I think if it helps give you a more consolidated picture, give employees a more consolidated picture of all the things that are possible, and different ways to engage, as well as their progress, right? I think there's a lot of this, whether or not you include gamification, badges and, stars and trophies into your learning strategy, or even your reward and recognition strategy within an organization, the way that people can see kind of their progress, see a path forward, and they're not bombarded with, infinite choices and infinite possibilities. I think that when tech has an opportunity to really shine and to be additive rather than detracting from a learning strategy. Lisa, you mentioned kind of these bolt-on solutions. So if you have, I think there's a delicate balance of, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, to use that phrase, and you don't want to make it so complicated that people are having to access a different system for every aspect of their employee experience. So there's a really fine balance there. I think to the extent that you make it simple for people, you help them through the technology application process. I think that's really helpful. But again, as we've talked about in a number of different areas and a number of the questions that you've asked, Lisa, it really can be a very delicate balance for what's enough, but what's not too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Kim, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So I think you're right. There's so many opportunities. I mean, I'm guilty of jumping into a LinkedIn Learning and then a masterclass and all over the place. I'll sign up for all kinds of webinars and then I realize they're, back to back. So, there's that opportunity. What I like is when you have when you have the ability to track. So using a good LMS, it doesn't have to be an expensive one. There's all sorts of different platforms, but where you as an employee can kind of track where you're going, you can share that with your manager. These things can be assigned, and I think that those are the important things. So you know where they're going. They have record of it, for themselves as much as their manager. So when it comes to maybe their quarterly check-in, they can demonstrate these are the things that they've learned, and you're all marching to the same drummer in the sense of these are the courses that we're, these are the learning path, these are the courses that we recommend, and giving them that support. And it, you will have some, and you should have some technical training as well as some soft skill training, communication type training. But I think it's really important that you're able to capture it in one place so everyone can go back and be aligned on what's been accomplished.
Yeah. Catalina, Krista?
I don't think I have any smart things to add, but to be honest, I don't think any of us or any of our peers have got the answer. But I think it's a combination of all of this, right? And again, for me, I'm personally super excited that after all these years, we're finally talking about these things, right? And we have, learning development and employee experience in one sentence. But I think it's all very much work in progress. And yet technology, I'm a big believer technology will enable things. We just have to be faster in adopting of teaching ourselves the skills, taking care of our own kind of skill set before we can push technology platforms, technology solutions and data to others. And I think that's where our function in general has been kind of lagging. I'm talking generally about the people function and also L&D. And yeah, we have to get on a program as well before we are kind of eating our own champagne or drinking our own champagne or eating our own dog food, right? Before we're asking others to upskill themselves. So there's a big job to be done there.
Yeah, absolutely.
We haven't really touched on virtual reality or augmented reality yet. I know some organizations are using those for sort of more hands-on simulated training experiences, sometimes for skills that can be too high stakes to practice in real situations. So conflict resolution, even things like coaching, emergency response, equipment operation. So simulations can be really valuable, and we can pull in VR and AR for those. I know Kim mentioned learning analytics within a learning management system. I think where the greatest potential right now is in personalized and sort of adaptive learning experiences. So if an employee puts within whatever platform this is their specific career goals, and then the platform suggests here are courses that people who have had a similar goal have taken in the past, or here are workshops that they've signed up for, experiences that they've engaged in. So sort of that personalized content delivery, I think there is a lot of potential there, and it makes it much more valuable for the employee rather than just this giant list of here are the thousands of courses that you have access to through what we offer. And so I think that that's probably where the greatest potential is right now, just adapting those learning pathways based on what the employee's goals are, how they're doing in their role. Performance can be brought into that as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you for bringing up the AI conversation, which is definitely a hot topic in HR, and it's will be ongoing for a while, because I don't think it's personally where it needs to be for us, or for me at least, to rely on very with much confidence, right? I have a lot of reservations there. And maybe it's because I'm old and I've been doing this so long, and I've been doing it for manually and in other ways. It could be partly that, but there's a ways to go there. But I do think that, to your point, Krista, there are ways to implement, to augment, right, that experience, right, and you know, to your point, the personalized part of that, right. You know, I did a panel recently about, you know, neurodiversity, right, and the importance of, you know, organizations prioritizing, you know, neurodiverse candidates and employees, and the personalized experience on all of these programs for people to learn the way that is best for them, right, and how they're going to is really important. And collecting the data on that, you know, where your organization is, what your initiatives are, et cetera. You know, and the whole tech redundancy thing, like, you know, I mean, you know, how many people, I mean, those of us that are coaches, how many times have you told your CEOs, like, okay, that sounds like a really cool tool, but I'm pretty sure based on your tech stack, we have like 3 things that are kind of sort of doing the same thing. So let's take a step back and like figure out what do we really need, right? Because ripping and replacing is more traumatic for employees than, you know, like, oh, that didn't work, we're going to take that away, let's put something else in, right? So you have to be really careful. And redundancy, I have seen so much of it, because I think through COVID, we just threw, you know, tech at something, right, hoping that it was the golden, you know, the silver bullet, right, for everything. And I think now unraveling that is a challenge. So brings me to my next question. Metrics. We talked a little bit about that, right? What metrics or indicators, you know, have you used that are effective in L&D? And what do those numbers tell us, right? It's, you know, measuring L&D is an ongoing challenge, right? People leaders invest a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy finding the right platforms, right? Setting up the journey, providing the right training at the right time. And, you know, you have to be able to measure it, and it's hard. There's some, you know, there's qualitative and quantitative, right? Share with us what your experience has been and how you've measured it in your careers.
Maybe I'll start with this one. And obviously, we all would like to take credit of, we've just trained some people in performance consulting and in consultative selling, and now they're selling more, right? That would be too easy. The reality is it's really hard to take all the credits for course immediately in looking at that, kind of how they apply their skills. However, I know back in the days with Vodafone, we did some work with McKinsey to actually measure the impact that highly skilled DevOps, for example, have on the performance of the squads immediately after they've been upskilled, right? And you can actually see that applied skill is a closest proxy to performance, right? So it's not just that I acquired the skill, but I'm also motivated and able to apply it, right? In an environment where I can demonstrate an impact. And I remember the founder of Netflix always talked about the 10x effect, right? How highly skilled software engineers weigh, their value goal, basically, because they're 10 times more effective. They deliver better quality code and faster than others who are novices. So that's a measure that I used to measure basically the impact of learning programs on applied skills, on their ability in proof points of their application of the new skill immediately in kind of daily work. And obviously that's it's hard to get those data sets, those environments. You have to really look at data end to end. You have to get feedback from managers and the whole shebang, and it's not always easy. But I've always preferred that to the evergreen vanity KPIs of look how many completions and how many badges badges are now very trendy, right? My people have got badges and they have a level 2, but really have they are actually able to apply these skills? Are they job ready? So ultimately, I think those are the things that we used with certain level of success, other than completions and hours of learning. Goodness, I hope we get rid of these KPIs. I think I still hear every now and again, I see posts on LinkedIn of, we have completed 100,000 of hours of LinkedIn learning. Well, congratulations. What does it mean in real life? Are you actually better at your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent point.
If I can just tell you, there's a lot of different things. If I mentioned earlier, engagement scores. There's once somebody's completed the training, you've got real-time, feedback. You ask right away how they felt about the training, if it's going to be applicable, if they got what they needed out of it. But then, you're right, Catalina, you can take 100 courses. That doesn't mean you're applying anything or you've actually even improved. You've just sat through another webinar. So you really do have to quantify as well as, qualify. You have to show both. So further, you look at what is the career trajectory, how have they progressed in their career, how have engagement scores gone up, and making sure that you're looking at it from a big picture. So yes, there's a ton of badges. We can have all of those, but what's the improvement in the team? What's the retention rate? Has any of those things adjusted as well?
Yeah, I would add, I agree with you, Kim and Catalina. I think there's a lot of different metrics and that you can utilize. And I think part of the issue with trying to measure the impact and the effectiveness of learning and development strategies is, Catalina mentioned it, you can't attribute all of it to the learning and development initiatives. And the second thing I think Kim touched on is that really excuse me, a lot of those have a long tail, right? So they're going to take time for you to see progress within the organization on things like retention and engagement scores. And in some of the learning initiatives that I've been a part of, while we do measure those kind of long-term business-related outcomes, one of the things that we've measured on more of a short-term basis is really the perspective of the learners and their managers. And I think Catalina touched on this just a little bit. I like to utilize more qualitative questions around the content itself. Do participants in the programs, in the initiatives, feel how confident and competent do they feel around this topic, around the learning capabilities? Then you take a pre-assessment and then you do one post-learning initiative. And I think the delta between those two, and then bringing in the manager perspective on how are they seeing those behaviors reflected, and a change in behavior potentially within that individual and the work that they do, can be a shorter term way to start to measure some of those more qualitative aspects, because again, some of the long-term improvements that you want to see in the organization are just that. They take a long time to manifest and show progress.
Absolutely. Krista, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that has already been shared. I was also just thinking about the qualitative feedback and sort of the immediate or shorter term success stories. Those can be really powerful too. I personally, I try to use a pre and post assessment whenever possible. It's not always possible, and it doesn't always give the best data, but I think it is a good starting point when there is a skill involved. Ideally, if we zoom out, we will be able to measure business impact in some way, but that can be really challenging depending on the learning and the organization and just access to data. So that business impact, I think, is kind of hard to reach sometimes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How much do you, and we don't all need to take this question, but how much do you think that a comprehensive, well thought out communication strategy, when you're first implementing something like this, what does that look like, and how important do you think that is for the success of it? Anyone can take that. We don't all have to.
I can start. I'm big on change management and communication. I think that you've got, you need to show that your leadership embraces it and how that's communicated and who's communicating, the frequency. I think it's really important to follow up with, here's where we're at, here's where we're going, this is what we've done. Keeping that conversation going keeps it top of mind, because we can all start out, our annual kickoff meeting, and we're going to give everyone 4 hours a month for training or whatever, and then we don't talk about it again. Then you've missed that opportunity. You really need to keep it. If it's a priority, you need to make it a priority and communicate it frequently.
Yeah, I think that to your point, so often those communication programs, it's great in the beginning, and then all of a sudden, how many times do people come back and go, well, whatever happened to that, right? Like, because it just falls to the wayside, right? So keeping it up, and we've talked about the continuous feedback loops, and making sure that it doesn't just disappear right after you put something in place, because it's there will be ongoing learning. And I always say that any type of transformation is about people and their ability to embrace a common purpose, right? Collaborate to advance it, and utilize new tools that fit for the purpose, right? That benefits the organization, right? The employees, the customers, sometimes society, right? So it's, that's digital transfer, any type of transformation, digital, anything is, it's about the people, right? It's not about the tech, right? Okay, so we're getting close. I can't believe an hour has already passed. Hard to believe. I want to thank everyone. Fantastic panel discussion. We touched on so many topics. I'm sure there's more. We probably could talk for hours. I want to conclude with each of you sharing a couple valuable pieces of advice for our audience as they may be embarking on implementing an L&D program in their organizations. What are a couple really important pieces of advice that we can give them to help them make that successful? We'll go around. How about Catalina?
I think we're going for loop. I think start with a so what, right? Start with the end in mind. Are you solving an organization capability problem? Are you solving employee engagement, growth problem? And then work backwards from there. So start with a why, as we love Sinek's book.
Yes. Start with the why. Always why. Christy, you want to go next?
Sure. So I touched on this earlier, but just how valuable the social learning and peer-to-peer learning can be, because I think there was a panel a while ago on loneliness in the workplace, and we have a lot of opportunities to actually affect that in a positive way. So think about how peer-to-peer learning, social learning might be weaved into your L&D strategy. I think the other piece that we have touched on too, but haven't really emphasized, is just investing in employees' career development. So helping them find ways to set specific career goals, find ways to build skills to get closer to those goals is really important, because career development is a priority for a lot of employees, but it's not always a priority for the employers.
Absolutely.
Well, I agree with both of those. Certainly starting with your why. What are you trying to accomplish? Whether it's a skill gap or succession planning or career development engagement. So starting with that, but don't just leave it at they took a course. Make sure that you give employees the ability to apply what they've learned, and show that and grow upon that. So again, you take a class on something, that doesn't mean you're an expert, but it means that you have some knowledge to apply. Let them apply it and grow from there.
Carol?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said. One of my favorite consulting questions that I often get, because in an L&D, in a people role, oftentimes people come to you with a predefined solution or a pre-perceived solution. So I would say, don't be afraid to push back gently and ask, what problem is it that we're trying to solve? And try to explore other options if that preconceived solution doesn't exactly hit the mark, or you're not seeing those connections. The other thing I would say is really being thoughtful about meeting the organization where it's at. You may hear about best practices in organizations, and from my perspective, they're only a best practice if they're going to resonate with your organization. So understand, what your employees need, what your organization needs, and don't be afraid to start from what may seem like baby steps and continue to iterate from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, with anything, I always, I start slowly, right? And start small, right? You don't have to go big. It doesn't have to be, a momentous, like, start small, right? And iterate along the way, right? Things can grow, scope out the challenges, right? Define what the company's mission and goals are for this, the why, the what, right? And then what skills do we need for that, right? I always do, a skills assessment if we're, doing a pivot in product or whatever. And I, usually will go to whomever I need to and go, okay, what does this pivot mean, right, for what people are doing today? And let's put everybody on the food chain here and figure out where we're, potentially naked, right? And can we upskill? Do we have to bring it in? What can we do here to fill those gaps, right? And then, collect the data and then bridge the gap. I think that's one of my biggest thing is once it's clear which skills are lacking, that will feed what L&D strategy will follow, right? Target the programs like peer-to-peer coaching, mentoring. You don't have to start with, like that peer-to-peer and mentoring is a really good way to start, right? Any type of L&D program, right? Great. Well, we're at the end. Thank you all so much. It's been fantastic. It's good to see those of you that I've done panels with before, and nice to meet the people that I have not. I am sure I will see you in the future, and have a great rest of your day, evening, night, and thank you to the audience for joining us from all around. I hope that we were able to get to some of your questions. It's hard. It's not always easy. We only have an hour, but please connect with all of us on LinkedIn. I think all of us would be happy to connect and continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.